The cameras rolled, the lights glared, and the atmosphere buzzed with the energy that defined every live episode of The View. Yet, on this particular morning, no one could have predicted that one of Hollywood's most respected actors, Liam Neeson, would soon reach his breaking point, right there, live on national television. The day began as routinely as any other Tuesday. In the green room, Neeson sat quietly, reviewing his notes for what was expected to be a standard promotional interview for his upcoming action thriller, Shadow Protocol. For decades, he had handled press tours with his trademark grace, thoughtful, composed, and endlessly professional. The hosts of The View had always treated him cordially in the past, and there was no reason to think today would be any different. A production assistant appeared at the door. "Mr. Neeson, we're ready for you." With a polite nod, Neeson stood, buttoned his jacket, and followed her through the maze of corridors that led to the main stage. The familiar theme music echoed as he waited for his cue just off stage. "Please welcome our next guest, the legendary Liam Neeson." Whoopi Goldberg's warm voice boomed across the studio. The audience erupted into applause as Neeson stepped into the lights, his tall, commanding frame instantly drawing attention. He waved, smiled, and took his seat at the curved desk beside the hosts, exchanging pleasantries as cameras zoomed in. "Liam, it's so good to have you back," Whoopi began smoothly. "Tell us about your new film." "Well," Neeson replied, his deep Irish accent resonating clearly, "it's called Shadow Protocol. I play a retired intelligence operative drawn back into the world he tried to leave behind after his daughter is kidnapped by a criminal organization he once helped dismantle. Sounds like another one of your Taken-style films." Sarah Haynes quipped playfully. "Do you ever get tired of playing the protective father figure?" Neeson chuckled. "People often ask that, but I think there's something universal about a parent's instinct to protect their child. It's raw, it's human, and audiences connect with that." "That's beautiful," Sonny Hostin added sincerely. "Your characters always have emotional depth beyond the action." For a while, the conversation flowed easily. Neeson discussed the physical demands of filming, his collaboration with the stunt team, and his evolving philosophy about action cinema in an age dominated by CGI and spectacle. Everything was running smoothly, until Joy Behar leaned forward. "You've been making these action movies for quite a while now," she said, her tone half joking, half cutting. "Don't you think you're getting a bit old to be playing the tough guy?" The studio fell silent for a split second. Neeson smiled faintly, keeping his composure. "Well, Joy," he said evenly, "I think experience brings a different kind of authenticity to these roles. I'm not pretending to be 25. I play men who've lived, who carry scars, who understand what's at stake." But Joy wasn't finished. "Come on," she pressed, leaning in. "You're 71. Isn't it time to hang up the leather jacket? Maybe try a nice romantic comedy where you're not punching people through walls." "I believe audiences connect to stories about resilience and determination, at any age," Neeson replied diplomatically. "And for the record, I'm 69. Joy waved her hand dismissively. 69, 71, same thing. You're still not exactly in your prime. When I watch those movies, I think, this guy should be in a retirement home, not jumping off buildings." Gasps rippled through the audience. The other hosts exchanged uneasy glances. Whoopi quickly intervened, trying to redirect. "Liam, tell us about working with your co-star in this film." "Yes, Rebecca Martinez is phenomenal," Neeson said gratefully, but the sting of the moment was visible. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Joy, however, seemed oblivious to the discomfort she'd caused. "I mean, seriously, Liam, you've been the tough guy for decades. Isn't it time to let the next generation take over?" That was the breaking point. Neeson's expression hardened, his patience visibly thinning. He leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Joy, I've dedicated my life to telling stories that inspire people. Stories about courage, loss, and redemption. If that makes me too old, then so be it. But I'll never apologize for doing what I love." The studio went quiet again, this time out of respect. Whoopi gave a subtle nod, signaling the producers to cut to a commercial break. Neeson stood, shook her hand politely, and exited the stage before the applause cue even started. Back in the green room, the air felt heavy. Crew members avoided eye contact. Within minutes, the moment went viral. Clips of the exchange flooded social media, sparking debates about ageism, respect, and professionalism in modern talk shows. For Neeson, the incident was more than a viral moment. It was a reminder that even the calmest men have their limits. And for The View, it was a lesson in what happens when banter crosses the line between humor and humiliation. That morning, live on national television, one of Hollywood's most dignified figures walked away, not in anger, but in self-respect. The conversation had been going smoothly, until Joy Behar decided to steer it somewhere deeply personal. Liam Neeson had just been praising his co-star, Rebecca Martinez, commending her intelligence and strength as an FBI agent who becomes his unlikely ally in Shadow Protocol. He was discussing how their dynamic drove the emotional heart of the film when Joy interrupted, her tone casual but cutting. "Speaking of emotional core," she began, "let's talk about your personal life. You've been a widower for what, 15 years now? Don't you think it's time to move on? Maybe find someone new?" The air in the studio seemed to chill instantly. The easy rhythm of the interview froze. Neeson's expression didn't change much, but his jaw tightened ever so slightly. "I prefer to keep my personal life private, Joy," he said quietly. "Oh, come on," Joy shot back, waving a dismissive hand. "You're a public figure. People are curious. You can't just shut down every time someone asks about your love life. Are you dating anyone? Are you even trying to date?" The tension in the room was now unmistakable. Cameras kept rolling, but even the audience sensed they were crossing into uncomfortable territory. "As I said," Liam repeated with calm restraint, "I prefer to keep those matters private," but Joy wasn't listening. Her voice grew sharper, more insistent. "You know what I think? I think you're stuck in the past. You keep making these revenge fantasy movies because you can't deal with real life. It's like you're living in a perpetual grief cycle." Sonny Hostin's eyes widened in disbelief. "Joy, maybe we should—" "No," Joy bulldozed over her. "I think this is important." The other hosts fell silent, unsure how to intervene. Joy pressed on, seemingly oblivious to the discomfort surrounding her. "Here's a man who clearly has issues moving forward. Instead of dealing with them, he makes movie after movie about getting revenge on bad guys. It's like therapy through violence." Neeson's hands rested motionless in his lap, but his knuckles had gone white. His composure was ironclad, though the tension beneath it was palpable. "I think," he said evenly, "you're making some rather significant assumptions about my psychological state based on fictional characters I portray. Am I wrong, though?" Joy challenged. "Let's be honest here. Your wife died in that tragic skiing accident years ago, and ever since then you've been making these movies where something terrible happens to a family and your character seeks revenge. That's not a coincidence." The silence that followed was heavy and unbearable. Camera operators glanced at each other uncertainly, but the feed stayed live. Everyone in the studio knew they were witnessing something deeply uncomfortable, something that had gone far beyond an inappropriate question. Whoopi Goldberg finally broke in, her tone firm but controlled. "Joy, I think we need to respect our guests' privacy on certain matters." But Joy wouldn't relent. "Privacy? He's a movie star, Whoopi. He puts himself out there. And honestly, I think the public has a right to know if the actors they support are dealing with unresolved trauma that might be influencing their career choices." That was when Neeson finally met her gaze fully. When he spoke, his voice carried the same quiet, commanding intensity that had defined so many of his film roles. "Miss Behar," he said, every word precise, with all due respect. "You are not qualified to psychoanalyze me or anyone else on national television." Joy crossed her arms. "I don't need to be a psychiatrist to see what's obvious," she snapped. "You lost your wife in a tragic accident, and now you spend your time making movies about men who lose their families and go on killing sprees. It doesn't take a genius to connect the dots." Sarah Haynes looked mortified. "Maybe we should talk about the technical aspects of the filmmaking process instead." Joy cut her off again, holding up her hand. "No, I want to finish this thought." She turned back to Neeson. "Liam, don't you think your fans deserve to know that when they buy tickets to your movies, they're essentially paying to watch you work through your grief in the most violent way possible?" The color had drained from Neeson's face, but his voice stayed steady, deliberate, unwavering. "My personal experiences may inform my work," he said, "but that's true of every actor. We all draw from our lives to bring authenticity to our roles. The difference is that I know where the boundary lies, between drawing from experience and being trapped by it." Still, Joy pressed on. "When was the last time you took a role that didn't involve someone dying or being taken from you? When was the last time you played a character who was actually happy?" "I've done plenty of dramatic work that doesn't fit that description," Neeson replied, his voice tightening. "But happiness isn't always where the truth is found." By now, the studio audience was silent. Even Whoopi's usual composure seemed shaken. Neeson sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable, part anger, part disappointment, part exhaustion. The segment ended moments later, abruptly cut to a commercial break. But the damage was already done. Viewers across the country would soon be talking about what they'd just seen, not because of a movie promotion, but because a morning talk show had turned into an emotional ambush, and through it all, Liam Neeson had managed to keep his dignity intact, proving that true strength isn't found in the loudest voice, but in the calm restraint of a man who refuses to be dragged down by cruelty. "Name one from the last 10 years, Joy Behar challenged, leaning forward with a smirk that dared Liam Neeson to respond. He hesitated, only for a brief moment. But in that pause, Joy sensed blood in the water. Like a predator circling a wounded animal, she pounced. "See? You can't," she declared triumphantly, "because you've pigeonholed yourself into this cycle of grief and revenge. And the worst part, you're making millions of dollars off your own unprocessed trauma." The audience let out a collective gasp. Sonny Hostin's face turned pale with shock. "Joy, this is really inappropriate," she murmured, glancing toward Whoopi Goldberg for help. "Is it, though?" Joy said, turning toward the camera with the confidence of someone who believed she was making a bold journalistic stand. "Here we have a man who clearly hasn't dealt with his wife's death. And instead of getting proper help, he's channeling his pain into violent fantasies that he then sells to audiences worldwide. Don't you think that's worth discussing?" Liam's hands slowly unclenched. He placed them deliberately on the table in front of him, his movements precise and controlled. When he spoke, his voice was calm. But beneath that calm was something dangerous, something cold. The kind of quiet that made everyone in the room instinctively lean in. "My wife's name," he began, "was Natasha Richardson." His tone was soft but firm, each word measured. "She was a brilliant actress, a devoted mother, and the love of my life. Her death was a tragedy that changed me forever. And yes, it influences my work, because it influences who I am as a human being." "Thank you," Joy said briskly, as though she had extracted a confession. "That's all I was asking for. A little honesty about how your personal trauma shapes your professional choices." "I wasn't finished," Liam replied. Something in his tone, sharp, controlled, and commanding, made Joy's smug expression falter for the first time. "What you're doing right now," he continued, "what you've been doing for the past 10 minutes, is using my grief as entertainment for your audience. You're treating the most painful experience of my life like it's a game, something to be dissected and analyzed for ratings." Joy straightened her shoulders, her defiance returning. "I'm asking legitimate questions about how personal experience influences artistic choices," she said. "That's what good interviewers do." "Good interviewers show respect for their guests," Liam shot back, his voice rising slightly. "They don't weaponize tragedy for shock value." "Oh, please," Joy scoffed. "You're being way too sensitive. This is The View, not some puff-piece entertainment show. We ask tough questions here. There's a difference," Liam said evenly, "between tough questions and cruel ones." His voice, once calm, now carried the weight of decades of discipline, the same voice that audiences had heard deliver threats in films. But this time, it wasn't acting. "You're not interested in my career or my process," he continued. "You're interested in watching me squirm while you poke at wounds you don't understand." Whoopi finally tried to step in. "Let's take a breath, everyone," she said diplomatically. "Maybe we can move on to the action sequences in the film." But Joy wasn't done. She leaned forward again, doubling down. I think what's really happening here is that Liam can't handle being called out on his pattern of behavior. He's used to softball interviews where everyone just praises him for being such a great action star. He doesn't like it when someone actually challenges him to think about what he's really doing. What I'm really doing, Liam said, his composure beginning to fracture, is trying to have a professional conversation about my work while you turn it into amateur psychology hour. There it is, Joy said triumphantly, pointing at him as if she had proven a point. You're getting angry because I'm hitting too close to home. You can't separate your personal feelings from your professional choices, and that's exactly the problem. The studio was silent now. The laughter, the chatter, the applause cues, all gone. Even the camera operators looked frozen, unsure if they should keep filming or cut the feed. This wasn't television anymore. It was something darker, a public unraveling disguised as an interview. Liam took a slow breath, his eyes locked on Joy. When he finally spoke, his voice dropped into that quiet, menacing register that millions of fans would instantly recognize, the sound of controlled fury. You know what the real problem is, Joy? He said softly. The real problem is that you think being deliberately hurtful makes you insightful. You think cruelty is the same thing as courage. I think honesty is important, Joy fired back, refusing to back down. And I think celebrities who make millions off their personal trauma should be prepared to discuss it honestly when they come on talk shows to promote their work. And I think, Liam replied, his words sharp as a blade, that talk show hosts who use their platform to humiliate their guests should find a different line of work. The audience didn't clap. They didn't gasp. They didn't move. The silence that followed was heavier than anything that could be scripted. The kind of silence that ends careers, and as the camera's red light blinked off and producers scrambled behind the scenes, everyone in that studio knew what they had just witnessed. Not an interview gone wrong, but a man reclaiming his dignity from someone who mistook cruelty for journalism. Liam's Irish accent grew sharper as anger tightened every syllable. The tension in the studio was suffocating, so dense it seemed to muffle even the hum of the cameras. Everyone present knew they were witnessing something explosive, a confrontation that would be replayed, dissected, and debated for years. Yet no one dared intervene. Joy Behar leaned back in her chair with a smug, self-satisfied grin, completely oblivious to how far she had crossed the line of decency. Look, Liam, she said smoothly, I'm not trying to be mean here. I'm just doing my job as a journalist. Sometimes that means asking the hard questions, ones others are afraid to ask. Liam turned toward her, his jaw tight, his voice quiet but dangerously controlled. Your job as a journalist? He repeated, the low tone more menacing than a shout. Is that what you think this is? Yes, actually, Joy replied, still defiant. Real journalism isn't about softball questions or promotional fluff. It's about getting to the truth, even when that truth makes people uncomfortable. Across the table, co-host Sarah Haynes tried to defuse the situation. Maybe, she suggested weakly, we could shift gears and talk about your upcoming projects? But Joy wasn't finished. Her tone hardened as she ignored Sarah's plea. No, Sarah, I think this is important. We have a responsibility to our viewers to ask meaningful questions, and I think it's meaningful to explore how personal tragedy shapes artistic expression, especially when that expression consistently involves violence and revenge. Liam's hands went completely still on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold and deliberate, the voice of a man who had reached the very edge of his patience. You want to talk about responsibility? He asked. Let me tell you what responsibility really means. It's treating your guests with basic human dignity. It's understanding the difference between probing journalism and public humiliation. Oh, come on, Joy scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. You're being dramatic. I asked tough questions about your career choices. That's what talk show hosts do. No, Liam said sharply, his voice rising now, the emotion breaking through. What talk show hosts should do is create an environment where their guests feel comfortable sharing their experiences. What you've done is turn my wife's death into a talking point for your entertainment. For the first time, Joy's expression faltered. A flicker of unease passed across her face, as if she finally realized she might have gone too far. But her pride kept her from backing down. "I never said anything disrespectful about your wife," she argued. "I simply pointed out the connection between your personal experiences and your professional choices." "You called my career a grief cycle," Liam shot back, his composure cracking completely. "You suggested I'm making money off unprocessed trauma. You turned the most devastating experience of my life into a punchline for your audience." Whoopi Goldberg glanced off stage at the producers, silently begging someone to cut to commercial. But the red light on the camera stayed on. The broadcast continued. "Liam, maybe we should take a quick break," Whoopi said cautiously. "No," Liam replied firmly, his eyes locked on Joy. "I want to finish this. Since Miss Behar is so interested in getting to the truth, let's have it." He leaned forward, his voice steady but full of emotion. "The truth is that my wife was an extraordinary woman, an actress, a mother, and the light of my life. Losing her nearly destroyed me. And yes, it changed me. It changed the way I see the world, and naturally the way I approach my work." Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Liam raised his hand, silencing her instantly. His movement was sharp, commanding. "The truth," he continued, "is that I take roles that explore themes of loss and redemption because they mean something to me. They allow me to process emotions I'll probably carry for the rest of my life. But there's a difference between acknowledging that connection and what you've done here today. The difference between insight and cruelty." Joy's voice softened, but her defense was weak. "I wasn't being cruel," she protested. "I was being honest about patterns I've observed in your work." "Honest?" Liam's voice cracked, the raw emotion finally breaking through his restraint. "Honesty is about seeking understanding. What you did was take my pain and twist it into spectacle. You didn't want truth, Joy. You wanted drama. You wanted to see how far you could push before I broke." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the camera operators hesitated, unsure whether they should keep filming the unfolding disaster. Liam exhaled deeply, his eyes still fixed on her. "You think cruelty makes you brave," he said quietly. "But real courage is empathy. Real journalism seeks to illuminate, not humiliate. What you did today wasn't brave, it was heartless." For once, Joy Behar had no retort. Her smirk was gone, her hands trembling slightly as the full weight of his words sank in, and as the studio lights burned overhead. Everyone watching knew they had just witnessed something far more powerful than an interview. It was a reckoning. "You want to talk about honesty?" Liam's voice cut through the tense air like a blade. His Irish accent was thicker now, each word carrying years of grief, anger, and control stretched to its breaking point. "Here's some honesty for you, Joy. You're not a journalist. You're a bully with a microphone who gets her kicks from making people squirm on national television. You hide behind the pretense of tough journalism, but what you really do is emotional vandalism." The words hit like a thunderclap. The studio, moments earlier buzzing with nervous energy, fell utterly silent. Even the faint hum of the air conditioning seemed painfully loud. Audience members sat frozen, eyes darting between the two as if afraid to even breathe. Joy's mouth opened, but her voice was smaller now, defensive rather than defiant. "That's completely unfair," she said, her tone lacking the arrogance she'd carried all morning. "I ask challenging questions because that's what good television requires." "Good television?" Liam repeated, his voice low and deliberate. He stood up slowly, his imposing frame casting a shadow over the curved desk. "You think this is good television? You think humiliating your guests and exploiting their personal tragedies is entertainment?" Joy's eyes flicked toward her co-hosts, silently pleading for someone to step in. But no one did. Sunny Hostin stared down at her folded hands, her face pale. Sarah Haynes looked as though she might cry. Whoopi Goldberg sat utterly still, eyes closed, as if praying for divine intervention, or for the floor to swallow them all whole. Liam turned his gaze back to Joy. "You know what, Joy?" His tone softened, becoming eerily calm, the kind of calm that comes right before an emotional storm. "You're right about one thing. I do have patterns in my work. I gravitate towards stories about men who refuse to give up when faced with impossible odds. I play characters who fight for what matters, who protect the people they love." He began unfastening the small microphone clip to his lapel, each movement precise, deliberate, like a man reclaiming control. "But here's what you got wrong," he continued. "Those aren't the movies of a man trapped in grief. They're the movies of a man who understands that some things in life are worth fighting for. Some things are worth protecting. And some things, like basic human decency, are worth defending, even when it means walking away from people who wouldn't recognize it if it slapped them in the face." Joy's expression cracked. Her mouth opened as if to speak, but no sound came out. The full realization of what she had done and who she had just provoked was sinking in. "Liam, please," Whoopi interjected softly, making one last attempt to de-escalate. "Let's take a breath. Maybe step back for a moment." But Liam was already removing the microphone from his jacket. He placed it carefully on the desk in front of him. The small thud it made reverberated through the studio like a gavel striking wood. "I came here today to talk about my work," he said, his voice calm but unwavering. He looked directly into the main camera, speaking now not just to Joy, but to the millions watching at home. "I came to share my passion for storytelling, my gratitude for the chance to bring these characters to life. Instead, I was ambushed by someone who believes personal tragedy is fair game for cheap entertainment." He turned his gaze back to Joy, whose earlier bravado had completely vanished. Her shoulders were slumped, her face pale. "I've spent my career playing men who stand up to bullies," he said quietly. "Today, I get to do it in real life." Without another word, Liam Neeson turned and walked off the set. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the studio like a slow, rhythmic drumbeat. No one moved. No one spoke. The red studio light stayed on, the cameras still rolling, capturing every second of his exit. The long shadow of a man who had just turned a moment of humiliation into a masterclass in dignity. Joy sat frozen in her chair, her trademark smirk gone, replaced by something almost like fear. Around her, the other hosts shifted uncomfortably. Sarah looked down, eyes glistening. Sunny exhaled shakily. Whoopi stared at Joy, her expression unreadable. The silence was unbearable. Finally, Joy tried to laugh, a small, brittle sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Well," she said weakly, "that was unexpected." No one laughed. Somewhere in the control room, a producer gave the signal to cut to commercial. But by then the damage was done. The clip would go viral within hours. Millions would see it, replay it, and debate it endlessly. Liam Neeson hadn't just walked off a talk show. He had exposed something raw and ugly beneath its polished surface. In trying to tear down one of Hollywood's most respected actors, Joy Behar had revealed herself to be exactly what he had called her. A bully with a platform who had finally picked the wrong person to push. And as the screen faded to black, one thing was certain: this wasn't just television anymore. It was history.